Right, we're recording. Everything's good. So we'll get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Teresa Ferguson. I'm the Executive Director of AustinUP. AustinUP is a nonprofit that was formed in 2014 as a result of the Mayor's Task Force on Aging. We work on issues related to the future of aging in Austin, and employment for those 50 plus is one of those issues. So we have been presenting or making presentations and seminars and webinars through COVID, through the pandemic, helping older adults kind of brush up their job search skills. And we are very excited today to bring Myles Wallace to you, peak performers. Myles has been such a font of knowledge, just telling us what is going on the front line of jobs and job placement here in Austin during the pandemic and even before. So Myles and I thought that now, as companies are opening up, companies are requesting their employees to come back into the office, we thought we would do a presentation about what's that like.
What's that like? Yeah.
What's that like anyway? And
it's on everybody's minds.
Right, and how we can navigate, how can the job seeker navigate that process? So with that, Myles, we're very excited to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Teresa. And also, by the way, where I first met Teresa was at an AustinUP event, which I hope that we'll get a chance to kind of do in person again someday. But AustinUP has these really fantastic job fairs that happen. In addition to that, she will bring in speakers for these job fairs too, and usually have it at the, was it the Jewish Heritage Center, I believe?
Yes, we've had them there, different places around town. Yes, 50 plus job fairs.
So in other words, stay tuned, everybody that's on the call right there. Hopefully you or somebody you know might be a good fit for AustinUP and able to kind of go to some of these events down the road in the future too. Hello, everybody. My name is Myles Wallace, and I'm with Peak Performers. Actually, let me go ahead and share my screen right here before I start getting ahead of my slides. I don't know about y'all, but I have this really bad habit where I will start talking and then realize that I just covered like half of my slideshow, and then I find the rest of my time backtracking right here. Anyway, today, in coordination with AustinUP, we're going to be talking about returning to work and particularly the office, right? Before we get started, I do want to kind of talk about the agenda today. I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions and answers, but don't hesitate to drop in a question in the chat. Teresa's going to help me monitor all of that. In addition to that, feel free, if you think that something is burning, needing, make sure to raise your hand, and we'll try to address it on the spot right here. I don't want people to ever feel like they are kind of like they lose track of what their question was going to be. But going through introductions, also talking about disclaimers and expectations from today's presentation. And then we're going to be talking about kind of the meat of it, of finding a job, but particularly like interviewing in this new super weird landscape. How do we even handle this, right? And then we're going to be talking about etiquette in the office, which may be applicable for some of you who currently are fully employed, but you may be returning to the office and you're just like, sure, how the heck do I do this? How do I navigate this weird new landscape here? And then finally, we're going to be talking about something that's also hot on many job seekers' minds, and that's redirecting your career, especially if you are a little bit older and you are trying to figure out what direction do I want to go at this point in my life and this point in my career too. So my name is Myles and I'm with Peak Performers. My official title is Strategic Partnership Specialist. And I always feel like I'm, what's that character on Looney Tunes, Sylvester, that's always like tripping over his S's just a little bit. I feel like that is like as a tongue twister built there for me. But basically what I do is I do a combination of business development, recruiting, and community building on behalf of Peak Performers. For those of you who are a job seeker, you can always feel free to connect with me via email or via LinkedIn. And hey, we'll have a conversation about whether you might be a good fit for Peak Performers. For those of you who may not be job seekers yourselves, but maybe perhaps know other job seekers, I encourage you to connect with me as well. And in fact, we have a couple other folks here that I know personally that I've had a long-standing relationship with. And thank you for joining the call today. And again, I try to be as approachable as possible. I like to view my role as many times during the job seeking process, it can feel like your resume is going into a black hole. I try to seek to alleviate that, at least in my small part, in whatever way I can. Try to make peak performance as transparent as possible and also help you out along the way because while not everybody's going to be a fit for peak performers, at the very least, I hope that I can help you find your next job a little bit faster. And real quick, we're going to talk about who is Peak Performers. So we are a nonprofit temporary staffing and recruiting agency that has been in the Austin area here for the last 26 years. Most of our clients are government agencies. And so some of our top clients right now are Texas Workforce Commission and Health and Human Services Commission and Department of State Health Services. So think any large government agency that works for the state, we're working with them. About 2/3 of our current associates work in Austin, and about 1/3 of them work outside of Austin throughout the state. Now, you may have heard me mention that we're a nonprofit staffing agency, and that is true. And we are actually one of only a handful of organizations like this across the entire country. And as a nonprofit, what we do is we give job hiring priority to people with disabilities and chronic medical conditions. In fact, currently 75% of our workforce is comprised of individuals that have a qualifying disability. Now, a disability could be something really visible and obvious, such as I'm missing an arm, or I have paraplegia, and so I'm in a wheelchair. But a lot of times it's actually very inobvious. A disability is anything physical, mental, or emotional, or perceived disability that affects one or more major life functions. So it could be something as obvious as that, or it could be something totally invisible about a person, such as ADHD or dyslexia or PTSD or sleep apnea or depression or diabetes. In fact, when I'm not talking to you using these guys right here, I'm usually using these guys to be able to hear you at a crowded job fair because I have a severe high frequency hearing loss. That said, I know disability is kind of a sensitive, touchy subject. Many of the people that we have working for us have actually been working with it and around it their entire professional careers. We are here to be another resource for you as part, and that's our nonprofit mission right there. So again, if you have questions on that, feel free to connect with me afterwards, and I'll definitely address those with you on a one-to-one basis. Now, if you go to our website, peakperformers.org, that's where you can go to click Browse Our Jobs. And there's two different ways that you can apply. First off, you can apply for a particular position where you see, hey, the administrative assistant 3 is open. Great, I want that particular role. So you click on that, and then basically you just upload a version of your resume tailored to that administrative role. But while we have a lot of roles that are open right now, you may not find one that's a perfect fit for you. For example, I just talked with a gal earlier today, and she is a very senior level administrative assistant type and more of a program specialist. And I'm like, great, you're a program specialist. She says, yeah, but I don't see any program specialist roles out there right now. I'm like, that's okay. Click join our talent pool down at the bottom, and that way you can be considered for future positions. So that's kind of how you go about doing it. And of course, if you have questions or concerns or not even sure if you're going to fit in with Peak Performance, you can always email me your resume, and I'll chat with you on a one-to-one basis as well too. Real quick before we kind of go on, some of the hot jobs that we are recruiting for at this given moment. We're recruiting for administrative personnel. We're recruiting for hearings officers. Those are people that actually have a background in law and are actually kind of working for the Texas Workforce Commission. Some of the other hot jobs include things like contract specialist and purchaser, things of that nature. So definitely check it out, peakperformance.org, and I'll drop a link in the chat after the presentation. Would you help remind me to do that, Teresa? I have a feeling that's going to be the first thing that I forget. All right, disclaimers time. Isn't it great when you show up to a presentation and they put a big old exclamation point on the screen and they say disclaimers, right? And this is not like those Apple warranty kind of things that everybody glosses over. I do want to make sure that everybody understands that, first off, I don't have all the answers. I think that really all of this returning to the workplace kind of thing is so new and so fresh for everybody that I don't have the answers. But what I hope this encourages you to do is to start thinking about it and start reaching out to other people within your community who might be able to provide you with answers. The other thing that I'm going to tell you is, I ain't a doctor. I like to joke that my mom really wanted to have a doctor in the family. And so I told her, Mom, I can get a doctorate in literature. And she was like, that's not quite what I'm looking for, Myles. So anyway, if you do have questions about this kind of stuff, I recommend that you consult with your physician, or that you look to like the CDC for general guidance. That's as much as I'll say on that end. And then finally, the last thing is I want to make sure that we don't, there's a lot of people that have various different opinions in the world, and I totally respect that. So what I want to make sure that we don't do is I don't want to fall down a rabbit hole of political discourse, because that's not what this is about. Peak Performers is an apolitical organization. We are out here to help all people. And so the information that I'm providing you and the opinions that I'm providing you, I'm seeking to provide it in as neutral way as possible so as to help everybody, because I think that we're all going to find our own points of conflict with each other, but also with, coworkers and managers and even our spouses as we try to figure out this whole thing. So let's just try to work together. Let's try to have good conversations with each other so that we can really kind of get through this all together, if you will. And finally, we'll kind of jump into the job search topic right here. So this is something that I am most intimately familiar with and I get asked about all the time is how the heck do I handle job searching during the age of pandemics, and particularly like how do I handle interviews? I want you guys to drop in the chat along the side right there, along the scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not confident at all to 10 being totally confident. How confident are you and how comfortable are you with doing an in-person interview? And I'm going to jump ahead to the next slide, but I encourage you to drop those in the chat right there. And I'm just kind of curious to see what the temperature is looking like in the room. Do we have any numbers popping up, Teresa?
Yes, 9. Comfortable.
9.
Comfortable if outdoors. I'm okay doing an in-person interview. 5.
Okay. 5, 9. Okay, cool. Gotcha. Good. So we have a range of different people with different kind of comfort levels as well, too. So here's why this matters, in my opinion. First off, many employers are going back to in-person interviews and going back to in-person jobs. Yes, there are still going to be opportunities out there for you to do to be able to do remote jobs, but I feel like there is so much demand out there that you actually have a competitive advantage in the marketplace to be to have a willingness to do on-site work. I know that I never thought that I'd find myself saying that, but yeah, being able to go on-site does give you a competitive advantage in this day and age, just because there are so many other people that are looking for remote work. So that's not me telling you not to look for remote work. That's me telling you, if possible, and if it works out with your own personal situation, I encourage flexibility because I think that you're going to be able to find more options. The other thing that I like to throw out there too is that a lot of times these things start off as remote or start off as on-site positions, but then once they get a chance to know you, then they might increasingly shift to a remote platform as well too. And then here's the last thing too, is this is awkward for literally everybody. So this is just as awkward for the employers. This is just as awkward for the on-site managers as it is for you. Everybody's got a whole lot of stuff to work through. So I just encourage you to really just kind of keep that front of mind. So let's talk about masks first. And real quick, Teresa, did you have anything to add to kind of like the remote job search aspect and stuff like that? I know we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah,
a little bit more.
Not yet.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about kind of masks and mask usage and just general kind of etiquette around that. So the general advice that I like to give all job seekers out there is to err on the side of caution, because you don't want to make some kind of a fumble, especially like an etiquette kind of fumble that costs you a job. And so for that particular reason, as a bare bones kind of starter point, I like to recommend that, especially if you're walking into a building for the first time, going to be doing an interview, that you do wear a mask to do it. And generally, you may see other people within that building that are not wearing a mask and stuff, at which point you might be able to have a conversation with them and just say, hey, my own particular vaccination status, I am twice vaccinated and whatnot. But do you want me to keep wearing a mask? And they may say yes, and they may say no. What I encourage you to do is really just kind of engage in conversations about these kinds of things as well too. But this kind of really, but also I would encourage each of you to be assertive about your own personal protective comfort, and make sure that if you are walking into an interview, that you make sure that you specify your preferences, and nobody is going to look down on you upon for that. Well, I say that the majority of the people that you are going to be talking to in an interview format would be willing to put a mask on if you ask them to nicely, and stuff as well. Is that kind of what you've been kind of experiencing as well, Teresa? Like, and how's the mask thing been for you, kind of as you're going about?
It is definitely personal preference, and asking the question, should I wear a mask? But then, Myles, do you have any advice when you're walking into a job interview? You don't want to rock the boat, or you
Yeah.
don't want to be seen as somebody overly, concerned. So, but I think it's important to ask regardless, right?
Yeah. I mean, my personal recommendation is to err on the side of caution and being cautious, not only for your own personal safety, but also just to make sure that you are respecting the safety preferences of other people too. But that said, a lot of times these things can happen ahead of time, where you can just kind of message the manager you're going to be meeting with and just saying, "Hey, I want to make sure that everybody's comfortable during this interview. Would you be okay? Would you like me to show up in a mask or not too?" And while this may not necessarily be something that you want to get too deep in the weeds in, I think that it's totally acceptable in this day and age, and I think most people would appreciate you having that forethought to kind of think about it a little bit as well too.
Right. Another question that has come up is that there are people who want to wear on their a T-shirt that says "I'm vaccinated." I'm vaccinated. And so at
Yeah,
what point do you insert that information into this conversation? At the front desk,
that
or
hold on, you skipped a couple of slides ahead of me here. So, hey, when do I discuss vaccination status, right? Yeah, that's I mean, this is kind of something that's totally weird from an HR territory. So from an HR territory, what we've typically been taught is you never discuss personal health information because you don't want to inadvertently discriminate against people, or intentionally discriminate. That's also bad too, right? So this is kind of throwing HR for a loop. And if you're watching any kind of news and stuff, there's going to be a lot of back and forth conversation about the whole vaccine passport and things like that. But really, the best thing that I can recommend to you is have these on an individual person-to-person conversation. So it's not something that I would go about broadcasting necessarily, but it is something that I would say that you could probably walk into, especially if you personally are feeling uncomfortable walking into a site, just saying, "Hey, I am double vaccinated," and having that conversation with everybody. I recently saw good friends of mine for dinner when I was up on vacation, and me and my wife showed up with masks on, and they said to me right as I approached the front door, they're like, "Hey, we're twice vaccinated," and we're like, "Oh, we're twice vaccinated too. Okay." And that's the end of the conversation. It was something as simple as that. But that said, I also understand that everybody's comfort level is going to be a little bit different too. I also understand that there are some people that are going to be twice vaccinated and may still be hesitant about that. So again, you want to make sure that you do assert yourself, not in an annoying way, but in a respectful way, so that you can make sure that everybody's being protective, including yourself, because that's really important. I mean, how bad is it to be walking into a job interview, which is, kind of stressful enough, and then also having to worry about your personal health and safety as well too. So a lot of things to keep in mind. There is no kind of single answer for that as well. How about handshakes and physical contact? Do you handshake with people, Teresa?
I'm Italian. I hug people. But that was pre-pandemic, and now I'm thinking, I better not. And also, you hear stories about introverts who say, all these people used to hug me all the time, and I couldn't do anything about it. And now, pandemic is great for that. And so I'm thinking, I
Sure.
better stop hugging people.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think right now where most people in the professional world are at, I think that occasionally you will come across a handshake, but it's not nearly as common. I think that what is much more common if you are making actual physical contact with another human being is doing fist bumps, doing the elbow bump, doing the foot thing, which I don't know what that's called, but that's kind of cool, right? I feel like I'm playing hacky sack when I do that, but I think that there are many other different ways to do that. But by far the easiest way is, again, you want to make sure that you're looking out for your own personal comfort. So if you're not comfortable shaking hands with somebody, the easiest, and you don't want to make it awkward, right? You don't want to like them going out for a handshake and then you're like, oh, too slow. Yeah, right. You want to make sure that what I like to recommend is that you're the first one to kind of do something. And so an easiest way to do that is just a very simple kind of curt wave. And that's kind of like from a distance before, like you can even get close enough to kind of do a handshake or a hug and stuff like that. And that's an easy way of kind of specifying what your preference is as well too. And the other thing is, don't be afraid to kind of talk about it and just say, hey, you know, I'm comfortable with fist bumps at this point in time too. And I think that most people are going to be respectful of that.
Myles, another question is,
Yeah.
so on your first day of work, keeping social distancing in mind, what about bringing, you know, your disinfectant wipes and your hand sanitizer? I mean, that could be awkward too on a desk.
Absolutely. So I think that it's important for you to protect your own space and make sure that it is a space that you feel comfortable in. And I think that there are going to be people that have different opinions than you. There are going to be people that might feel that, hey, perhaps you're taking this overly seriously, or you know that you don't need to go through that much effort. Okay, that's fine. They can think that. What you need to do is you want to make sure that you respect your own space and that you also respect the space and the boundaries of other people as well too. So when it comes from social distancing too, what I like to recommend to people is that you just kind of sit down in a situation and then you kind of figure it out as you go too. If it feels like it's a little bit too close, whereas before it might have been seen as a little bit like out, you know, just aloof or something like that. I think that it's totally acceptable to back up just a little bit. I don't think that anybody's going to judge you for that. The biggest thing is that as long as you're not making a huge scene about it, then I think that generally most people are going to be cool with that, especially for you kind of just taking the steps that you need to do to make sure that you feel comfortable. And let's talk about accommodations and alternatives to this kind of thing. So it's again, I will say that you have a competitive advantage if you are willing to go to on-site interviews, especially for an on-site job right now. That said, there has never been a better time to request a particular accommodation. I saw one of the people mentioned in the chat, hey, I could do a in-person interview outside. Great idea. That's fantastic. And I think that that's totally something that you could ask for. Whereas that might have been seen as like a little bit kind of off the wallish before. I think right now in this given age, I think that most people would probably be opening to at least considering that. And you know what? It never hurts to ask for these kinds of things. Additionally, too, just keep in mind that, you know, we do have all this technology available to us. So if you're not comfortable doing an in-person interview, then perhaps you can specifically request to do a remote interview via video chat or via phone chat and stuff as well too. So let's talk about returning into the office and kind of the etiquette that goes along with that. So I wanted to start off with kind of sharing my own personal journey. So my personal journey is I actually returned to the office in June of 2020, which was about a year and some change ago now. I will admit that I was one of the first workers to actually go back to on-site, especially in an office environment, whereas most of the people that I was working with were actually still working remotely during that time and are only now beginning to kind of transition to kind of working in the office. The way that I handled it right there is what I would do is I would wear my mask around the office. When I sat down at my desk, I would take my mask off and I put it back on whenever I needed to go walk around. And in general, most of our staff were pretty good about doing that particular thing, especially kind of in those beginning stages before everybody was starting to get vaccinated as well. In addition to that, when a coworker approached me, then typically what I would do is I would put on my mask, and generally they would kind of get the hint and they would go and say, oh, sorry about that. Let me go and find my mask and put it on before I chat with you. But generally, everybody was pretty respectful about that. And worst comes to worst, I could always say something and just say, hey, could you just grab your mask real quick? I would feel much more comfortable having this conversation with you right there. And I'm not going to lie, it was awkward. Right, this is awkward stuff. This is the mask on, mask off. Trying to figure out how to share this kind of shared, how to use this shared space. But we made it work. It is something to kind of keep in mind. And then finally, I recently stopped wearing a mask once I was fully vaccinated. But I was just curious, actually, to kind of talk with you, Teresa. So, where are you at right now?
Yeah, sometimes wherever I go, because I work from home, I've always, worked from home. And so wherever I go, I kind of follow the crowd. What are they doing? If everyone's masked up, then I'm masking too. And yeah, but then again, I think if I am wearing a mask and everyone else isn't, I still want to have a sign that says I'm fully vaccinated. Because it is scary. It's scary right now for people who are not vaccinated. And
For sure.
yeah. And so I applaud you, Myles. I mean, coming to the office last year before the vaccine. Yeah, that was.
It was scary. There were certain parts of it that were scary. It was important for our business to be able to do so. And we kind of did a bit of a hybridized model too, where some of the staff stayed at home. So we were actually only had about a third of our staff working on site. And we had a number of people that either just were really, really, really strongly uncomfortable with it, that chose to work from home, or we had people that had pre-existing medical condition that would make it particularly bad for them to get COVID, where our particular kind of office allowed them to work from home as well too. So that's kind of how we handled it as a business. And I guess if there's one takeaway from this is that there's no clear answer. There's a lot of flexibility in this. It's important to make your voice known, and it's important to kind of be flexible and be willing to negotiate. So I was actually just kind of curious, Teresa. So if we were to share an office together and work together 8 hours a day, what would be your comfort level? How would we be able to make that work?
Social distancing.
Okay.
Yeah, and hand sanitizer, I guess. And maybe another question that I have for you is, have you noticed, and because we're AustinUP, our community is mostly older adults, have you noticed a generational thing as far as masks and comfort in going back to a workplace, younger versus older?
I think that sometimes, yes. I think that it can be generational. I think it can be geographic as well. I think it can be a number of different factors. I was actually pretty surprised when I went on vacation and I got on the plane, and I mean that tells you kind of what comfort level I'm at. I was able to wear my N95 mask on the plane and fly over to first to the Chicago area and then go over to Cleveland with my parents-in-law. And it was interesting because when I was on the plane, I wore a mask the entire time, as did everybody, a single other person that I saw on the entire plane. And then also in the airport, I would say the vast majority of the people were really, really good about that kind of thing. But it was interesting because as soon as I kind of stepped outside, we hit kind of more of a geographically rural area. We were outside a lot. And so the mask thing kind of went away a little bit too. So it's really hard for me to say. Yes, I do think that maybe some of the young people might be a little bit less keen to wear masks, especially after they've been fully vaccinated. But I couldn't say for sure. It's also a geographic thing to a certain extent as well. I was out in an area and I don't think I saw a mask on the entire time while I was out there too. So, which was good because I was outside that whole time. So that was kind of ideal for me and kind of where my comfort level was as well.
Another thing, Myles, about working in an office, I mean, remember the old days when maybe somebody was having computer trouble and you would get on their computer, their laptop, and, click and try to help them. But that shared equipment, shared desks, I mean,
Yeah, shared equipment, right? Yeah. How do we
the
handle
printer and the coffee maker and things like that. I mean, what's happening there about desk space? I mean, I've been
that?
hearing about offices who are changing up the way they think about that.
I think that, so when I was actually going in and I was working with Texas Department of Transportation, and at the time their offices were very, very largely absent, but there was pretty much no staff in them altogether, and everybody's working off site. But they had kiosks kind of set around where you could go put on hand sanitizer every kind of couple of steps. Additionally, they had put on each of the doors, they'd put these little kind of things where you could like kick them open a little bit too. So it was pretty tricky too. I hadn't seen anything like that before. Here at Peak Performers, we took steps to kind of sanitize our equipment and really just kind of make sure that everything was wiped down really, really well. I would say I would be the first to admit that some of this can I think that everybody starts off being super vigilant about it. I think that the more that you do share space with people, I think the more that you get comfortable and the more that you may not be quite as active about wiping everything down every single time. And you know, I'm not going to say whether that's okay or not okay. I think that's just kind of the way that it is in an office environment. But that said, I think that you should really just make sure that you take steps to take care of yourself and your own like just comfort level as well too. The other thing that I would kind of point out too is that you want to make sure that you are willing to negotiate. There are a lot of people here that, for good reason, you know, their own personal health and safety, they have very, very kind of hard lines in the sand, if you will. If at all possible, if it can be negotiated, I think that that behooves you. Particularly, like I don't want anybody to lose their job because they weren't able to budge on something. So, to give you a personal example. One of the worst arguments that I had with my wife over the last year, she was at a very different comfort level than I was at. So I came into the office and I would take my mask off at my desk, whereas she would leave her mask on the entire day while she worked. And I say, hey, you know, I have glasses and I cannot avoid them fogging up. And it's very draining for me and it's very difficult for me to focus on my work too. And that was a hard conversation with the two of us. That was something that we really, really needed to have a negotiation on. Additionally, one of the other things that was challenging too was when it came down to where I would be actually sharing an office space with somebody else and be, you know, potentially like within 8 feet of them or something. I was kind of at that particular point of my comfort level where I was able to say, hey, you know, it's just one person to add to our network. You know, I'm not saying that it's not a big deal, but I'm saying that I know that this coworker is being extremely careful, as are we. I would hope that we would be able to kind of work without a mask on. My wife was at a very different kind of comfort level too. And that was another very hard conversation too. So this stuff is not easy. You know, this is something that you are going to have a lot of conversations back and forth on. There's going to be a lot of push and pull. The biggest thing that I would tell you is that you have to keep the communication lines open, and you just want to be really, really careful about kind of like setting a very firm, hard like place, and just be open to negotiation if at all possible. So, and that's not to say to minimize anything. It's just, I think that definitely helps. It definitely helps for us as well.
Myles, we had a question in chat. What is social distancing? Is that 3 feet or 6 feet?
Social distancing. I mean, typically the guidelines right now are, I believe, still 6 feet. That said, I think that it changes. Like if you're outside, I think that it also might change now too. To be honest with you, I checked the CDC. I'm not sure what their actual recommendations are right now, particularly if both parties are vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
And the final thing that I would kind of throw out there as well too, as you're kind of having these hard conversations and these negotiations, know where your boundaries are, and also know where other people's boundaries are as well, because it's just as important that you know where other people's boundaries are during the course of this too. And you may need to make sure that you're being respectful about that and having conversations all along the way. No, that was you. You beat me to the punch here. I was talking about sharing shared office equipment and stuff like that. I'm like, how many people get a bit of a cringe right now when they see that picture, right? Like, you know, two kids sitting there sharing an ice cream cone. They're like, oh, not this time. Can't do that right now. I guess the biggest thing that I would throw out there too is that this stuff is all awkward. Stuff is all a little bit touchy. So the biggest thing is that just realize that everybody's going through this together too. Here's the other kind of thing that I would throw out to everybody as well, is that if you are going to be going back into the office soon, is dip your toe into the water a little bit. Um, I think it's definitely a bit of a shock to your system if you show up for your very first time after you've been socially distancing and in your own house for the last year and a half, and all of a sudden you go back into the office like it's normal, right? That ain't normal. That's a little bit of a shock to the system, and everybody's going to feel a little bit weird. So what I'd encourage you to do is, if your office place is considering going back into the office, maybe take a second to just kind of drop by there one day, just to kind of see how things are, just kind of see how things are arranged, and just be able to kind of mentally plan for what sorts of things are going to make you uncomfortable, and really kind of think about what kind of boundaries do I need to establish for myself in order for me to feel comfortable as well too. But that can mean a number of other things too. Let's say you're going in for an interview and you have not done something on site for the last year and a half, right? Um, I think that that would be really hard to do an interview and not having like been physically around another person for the last year and a half. So what I'd encourage you to do is, hey, go out there, find other people with whom you do feel safe and can socialize with. So you start dipping your toe in the water a little bit with this kind of thing as well too. And finally, my last thing is have conversations, not confrontations. I can tell you that when I was flying this last weekend, I was actually more worried about people getting into fights than I was about about getting COVID-19 myself. And I think that there's a lot of people that have developed very, very firm views on this sorts of thing, either on one side or the other. And no matter what way you slice it, some of you listening to me right now may feel like my comfort level is unreasonable or is risky or various different things like that. And that's okay. I respect your opinion. What I would encourage each of you to do is have conversations, every single time that you possibly can, and really seek to avoid confrontations. You don't want to be going out and you don't want to be picking fights over this kind of thing. You don't want to show up for your first day in a shared work environment kind of thing with your fists up in the air. You want to really try to have as much of this. You want to just keep the dialogue flowing, and that way the fists don't go up. And finally, does anybody feel awkward at like office parties, right? I think that I definitely do. Sometimes even like the water cooler talk can be a little bit awkward as well. So what I'd encourage you to do is start thinking about kind of re-entering and kind of working with people in close proximity, and also figuring out that whole social aspect of it. But here's the other thing too, is that you don't necessarily need to dive right in. Again, dip your toe in the water a little bit first and make sure that you respect your own kind of personal comfort level as well. So do I recommend that you go to a wild raging, office party your first day back into the office? No, I don't think that that's a great idea right there. I think that that's a perfect opportunity for you to do your work at your desk, have some polite conversations with your coworkers, go for lunch in the park, come back to your desk, and then maybe leave 15, 20 minutes early for that day, right? You want to be nice to yourself. But as you get there, you will kind of get to a point where you are more comfortable talking with people, sharing with things. And here's the other thing too, is that I'd encourage each of you to start thinking about the people that you know in the office place, those people that, maybe you hear them talk about their kids or their hobbies, and start thinking and kind of coaching yourself to say, hey, what do I know about Joe? And, how can I kind of start to kind of pick things back up with Joe and stuff? And I think that many of you are going to find this incredibly valuable too. It was when I first returned to the office, I was pretty uncomfortable doing so. But I think that it was rewarding for me to be able to kind of have those little conversations with people and do stuff with people outside of a formalized work environment too. There's a lot to be said for the Zoom format, but I do think that there is an element that might be missing sometimes. And sometimes it really is nice to have that personal connection and those small things with people in a shared space too. Real quick, before I kind of move on to the next thing, Teresa, do you have anything to add, or do you disagree with me on anything? I'd encourage that. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, this all makes sense, but I do have questions about, and I don't know where you're going about detour, but we've been hearing, especially from older adults, people who have been in jobs during the pandemic, have been working from home, and now are thinking, no, I don't want to do this anymore. So something about the pandemic has made them really change their minds. But are you you may be going to talk about that later, or?
Yeah, that was actually my next slide. Yeah. Yeah. So what do I do? And just out of curiosity, feel free to drop in the chat right there if you are in a similar space right now to where you are thinking about switching careers, or you're considering gig work, or you are specifically only looking for remote work. I'd encourage you to kind of drop in the chat right there exactly kind of where you're at. And it's okay too if you haven't made up your mind, if you are kind of currently in between various different things. The short answer of this is that I don't. I think that this is a really good period of time to transition. I want to make sure that each of you are doing it for the right reasons, though. So, for example, if you are looking to, say, for example, add an additional degree under your belt and completely shift career fields, if you're doing that because you want to shift career fields, then I think that is a great reason and a perfect reason. You are never too late in your professional career to learn additional things, and I encourage you to do so. If you are switching careers right now because your current job is making you physically uncomfortable, and they are kind of plan on bringing you back into work, my advice instead would be find a different job. And it's as simple as that. I want to make sure that you kind of are doing stuff for the right reason right here. But there are a lot of opportunities that are popping up. For example, it is currently estimated that 20% of all the jobs in the United States are temporary or contract based, which is huge. And it is expected that that number is only going to go up. Now, this particular industry has its share of problems, particularly with the whole, not to get too deep in the weeds, but like, treating people as independent contractors when they're really an employee. There can be some problems right there. But what you can find is you can find some legitimate options for doing gig work kinds of stuff. And gig work does not necessarily just mean that you are, driving for Uber. It can also mean that you are also doing a variety of kind of consulting kinds of things as well. So this can be a really good opportunity for you to rebrand yourself and really kind of switch what it is you're looking for too. And then finally, we're going to kind of circle back to like remote work. Hey, is it like reasonable for me to only expect remote work? So remote work is more prevalent now than ever before. But again, I think that more and more jobs are coming back on site. If you read any kind of news like I do, they will cite up and down how typically productivity is up, even with all the people that are working remotely right now. And yes, I totally understand that, but I also understand from a business perspective that typically, I think that the people that are sometimes making the decisions about these sorts of things oftentimes kind of like going into the office, and they get a lot of joy out of that. And I think that it is important for you to kind of align yourself with that particular team who enjoys kind of going into the office in order for your own professional advancement as well too. So just something to kind of keep in mind that there are a lot of kind of shifts right now trending in that general direction. You can find work from home opportunities, but they're going to be the most competitive jobs that are out there right now. What else would you add, Teresa?
Well, that's another question. So remote work takes on a new meaning where you can be applying for a job in a different state. So
Yeah.
are there considerations there? Have you seen that increase, that activity increase?
I personally have seen a little bit of it increasing right here. There still tends to be, so for example, for peak performers, it's kind of crazy, but like I think that around a third of all the people that work for us right now live within 4 geographic zip codes, right? And so, despite the fact that we do push our jobs out there to everywhere and have them widely available, we still see a dense concentration of people that are working for us that are physically close to our office. And so I think that you're going to see a lot of things like that. As you continue to explore remote opportunities, yes, you will find stuff that are in different states. I'd encourage each of you to really just kind of look out for those standard red flags, just because you want to make sure that you know what you're getting into. And some of those red flags, you may already be aware, but bear with me as I just kind of explain. But certain things like an employer asking you for your social security number right out of the gate, like the very first time that they communicate with you, that's a red flag. Or if they're asking you for your credit card information right out of the gate, okay, that might be problematic right there. If you have employers that seem to be difficult to get a hold of sometimes, and I don't mean in like the way that they're busy, but it seems like, it seems like they're evading, then maybe that might be something to kind of be aware of as well too. So just kind of keep all these in mind. If you ever have any questions about like the actual legitimacy of jobs, I'd encourage you to reach out to Workforce Solutions or the Texas Workforce Commission and ask them, because they can help provide a little bit more insight into what to watch out for like red flags for jobs as well.
That's good, Myles. Another question we had is, aside from the probationary period where the employer is still learning about the new employee, is there a trend toward hybrid, in-person and remote during the week?
Yeah.
Right from the start.
Yes, I would say that there is. And right from the start sometimes, but I think that this is increasingly happening more and more right now. And for example, I was actually talking with my friend who works for a company that does kind of digital marketing kinds of stuff. And he's like, hey, during the pandemic, we did really, really well. And we actually outgrew our office. And so we are coming back into the office. But right now, we're only going to go back into the office 2 days a week. And then we're going to work remotely the other 3 days of the week. And this is surprisingly common. There has been a huge number of various different employers that have actually grown in spite of everything. And they're finding that they just physically don't have enough space. But there's also realizing that this is some kind of perk that they can offer out to a lot of people. And so a lot of times, as part of the way of attracting job seekers in a competitive market, is they will specifically specify, hey, work from home 2 days, 3 days. The thing that you want to be careful about is that when you're looking at job descriptions online, it's typically binary. So it usually says, is the job remote? Yes or no. They don't have an option for hybrid. And so what you have to understand is sometimes they will include that in the information, but a lot of times this happens through more informal arrangements once you have a chance to talk to the hiring manager. And I'd encourage each of you to do so. Have those conversations and see if it is possible to work part of the time remote.
Gotcha. Another question, and Bill, let me know if I'm not framing this correctly, but he says, why can't we follow state guidelines? And so I imagine that means state guidelines for how the office is operating. So are there companies that are not state, non-state, businesses saying whatever the state does, we're going to do? Does that ever happen?
Yeah, I don't know if I really could begin to kind of speak for the Texas government or for the national government in that way. That would be, I feel like that would be me overstepping my bounds. I think that right now we have a very, very much kind of a patchwork system where it's going to change geographically based off of where you're at in a very large degree as well too. So I don't know if I can answer that question, I'm afraid. Sorry, Bill.
Good.
How are we doing on time, Teresa?
It's about 10 till 3.
Okay, cool.
You doing okay?
Oh, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah.
I'd like to hear from our audience about their experience too. So feel free to mute yourself if you'd like to, and just tell us what you're experiencing. Miles, while they're thinking, this is your reminder you were going to put a link in the chat box.
Yes. Okay, cool. I'll go ahead and do that right now.
Great.
So everybody, that is a link for all of the jobs that we have open at this given moment. And again, I encourage you to check it out and see what jobs may be a fit for you. Yeah, definitely kind of check it out. And I will tell you too that we occasionally will get remote positions through peak performers as well too, but we will always try to specify it in the job description too.
Great. And Miles, another question I had was, so if a person is willing to go, work on site, is that a negotiating point when talking about salary? Saying that because I'm.
Oh, like whether you should bring that up during negotiations?
Right.
Yes, it can be. In general, I think that it all comes down to kind of having a conversation, but I wouldn't necessarily hold it off until the salary negotiation stage because you want to make sure that you don't blindside your employer. The same kind of thing comes up with disability conversations, actually, where the biggest thing that we tell people is you don't want to blindside your employer and, be ready to start the next day and then all of a sudden say, by the way, I also have a disability, right? That's going to require a particular accommodation. And I think that this is very kind of much rings true for this particular set of circumstances as well. I would say bring it up during the interview and bring it up in an open way and don't be too ready to close your door immediately to an opportunity as well too. Be listening for things like maybe, be listening for things like, well, I'm not sure, I'd have to check with people on that. And then I just put a pin in that and come back to that, circle back to that a little bit later. But yes, that can definitely be part of the kind of negotiation when you're talking about the job.
Katie says, I work for Travis County and we have not returned to the office yet. Our employer wants to have 75% of the staff to stay working remotely.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, and Katie, are you going to be part of that 25% or are you going to be part of that 75%? Cool. Be able to work remotely. Fantastic. Well, and I hope that you are excited about that, Katie. That's if you are, that's great. Yeah, cool.
Miles, another question I had is about like computer equipment, all the equipment that allows us to work remotely. Are companies covering that expense for their employees? And is that changing at all?
Generally, yes. Generally, they are covering that expense. For example, like when you work at Apple and you work at Apple Care, then typically they will ship you a computer, and most companies are willing to do that. Sometimes they will specify that you need to bring your own, and I find that that's more the case for like especially smaller and mid-sized employers. But I would say that the majority of the time, your employer wants to control the data that's on the machine, so they're going to give you the machine. And it would be an overreach for them to go into your personal equipment and say, here, I need to install something to be able to track your every waking movement, right? So I think that that's common. The other thing that, as you mentioned that I should mention too, when it comes to kind of just unusual circumstances, it's kind of funny because we've come a long way with our staff. We are more and more people are feeling very, very comfortable in the office, and most of our staff is in the office now at this particular time. But there are some holdovers still that maybe if you're looking on through our office window and you look at us 10 years from now, would seem kind of weird. Like we do all of our office meetings standing up and standing 6 feet away from each other in a gigantic circle in the middle of our room. But in addition to that, the people that are not able to join or are working remotely, we actually have them on a Zoom call, and then somebody sits there with the laptop and kind of rotates it around to each of the speakers as well too. So I think that you're going to see a lot of hybridization. You're going to see a lot of just kind of people figuring it out as they go along.
Yes. A question in the chat. What are your suggestions if someone has been out of the workforce caring for an aging parent?
Sure.
How to put this on a resume and how to handle this on LinkedIn?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Linda. So the biggest advice that I give to everybody when it comes to resume gaps is that make sure that you put something in there. I think the biggest mistake that can happen is when you just simply leave a gigantic hole and the employer is left wondering what the heck you've been doing. So as far as resume gaps, some of the different things that I recommend is I recommend being as brief as possible. While still kind of answering the question. So for example, if you were taking care of a aging parent, or if you were taking care of kids or something like that during this time, I would put down family caregiver or something along the nature of there. Generally, most employers are going to be understanding, but the other thing that you want to make sure that you do is that you want to make sure that the employer knows that you are ready to work, and you can do that through persistence, through follow-up, through professionalism towards them, through building your LinkedIn profile and showing that you're ready to work. And then the other way that you can kind of help overcome the employer's fears is the number one thing that they're worried about is they're worried that you've lost your skills. And so maybe you can take an additional certification class, or maybe you can be doing some kind of volunteer work that help kind of give you that experience level. Just something to show that you are still keeping your skills current is a way of helping you get there. But the more that you can get physically into an interview, the better chances that you're going to be able to get it. Thank you, Linda. Appreciate the feedback.
That's terrific. And Myles, I know that you have written about that and posts on your LinkedIn profile. And so I think that's a good time to plug your LinkedIn profile because you offer a lot of good information for job seekers.
Yeah, feel free. Everybody connect with me. I'll drop my LinkedIn connection right here. I'd encourage each of you to connect with me on LinkedIn. I do try to share stuff a couple of times a week that I think is going to be valuable for job seekers and stuff that's also valuable towards the disability community too. So feel free to connect with me and connect with Teresa too. So, AustinUP is a fantastic organization. Should we call it a wrap there, Teresa?
I think so. And as far as AustinUP, check our website, austinup.org, for ongoing programs. We are hosting about 2 programs each month about specifically for job seekers. One that's coming up in August, I'm pretty excited about. It's with a resume writing company called Let's Eat, Grandma. And when you come to that, it'll be a Facebook live presentation. You'll hear about why the company called itself Let's Eat, Grandma.
That sounds pretty interesting, right?
Well, sure. That's what we do here at AustinUP.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah. Good to see you, and happy job hunting to each of you.
Terrific. Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Bye.